Morning, grade fives. Good to have you with me. I'm so pleased you're here for another maths lesson. Let's not waste time. Let's jump straight into the maths. So we've got quite a lot of stuff to get through, but if you'd like to email me, it's grade5@worksheetcloud.com. I'm Mr. Travis, Mr. T. And after the lesson, do the worksheet by clicking on the link above and just make sure that you've got today's concept. As per usual, when we start the lesson, we're going to start with 10 mental arithmetic problems just to check that your brains are on point. And we'll also, just to make sure that you get these things fast, or you sort of start to learn these facts. So I've used 2 operations today, plus and multiplication. So just make sure that you don't do the incorrect operation. So you have 40 seconds, 10 questions, just the answer. Your 40 seconds start now. Time's up. I hope you managed to get all of those done. If not, at least that you're improving on what you managed to get done last time. Let's mark them quickly. 2 plus 6 is 8. 9 plus 2 is 11. 7 times 2 is 14. 10 times 6 is 60. 2 times 8 is 16. 4 times 4 is also 16. 6 times 6 is 36. 3 plus 8 is 11, 6 times 7 is 42, and 9 times 9 is 81. If you missed any of those, just rewind the video, watch it again, and just make sure you've got it right. As has also become custom, we're going to start with one of these ones to test your brain. I think start with the first line, because then we've got all 3 things the same, we can figure out from there. Just also take note that in the third line, you can see 2 yellow flowers, and in the last line, there's only 1. So whatever you get for the 2 in line 3, it'll be half of that for line 4. Okay, I'm going to switch across to the whiteboard just while you guys get going with that. It's on the whiteboard as well. There we go. I'll give you a little time to get going with it before I work my way through it as well. If you'd like more time, which you may very well do, just pause the video so that you can have as much time as you need. I'm going to work my way through. Also, if I get one of the lines and you think, now I can carry on from here on my own, pause the video then, and then you can always carry on when you're ready. So for the first line, we've got 3 things that are all the same that come to 60. So we've got to share that 60 out amongst the 3 things, and if I do that, I get that each of these red flowers is worth 20. So I'm going to go ahead and put 20 on all of those 3. Plus, I'm also going to put 20 on the ones in the other lines, because those will also now be 20. Now that I've got that, I can have a look at my second row. So I've got to get to a total of 30. I've already used up 20 of those. So I've got another 10 to share out equally between these 2 flowers, which means that each of these flowers is worth 5. And I can go ahead and put 5 on each of the ones in the other lines as well. Now we're down to the next line. In the next line, you can see that we've got 5 minus something gives me 3. So together, these are worth 2, but they're 2 flowers. So 1 flower would be worth 1, which means that in this line, I'm going to put a 1. 20 plus 1 is 21, plus 5 is 26. And so your final answer for the question mark is 26. Right, I hope that your brains are starting to wrap themselves around these kinds of questions. Let's get back on with our lesson. So today we're going to have a look at rounding off. It's one of those things that you get asked to do every year for the whole of primary school. And the only thing that really changes is that they give you bigger numbers to round off, or in grade 6 and 7 they might give you decimal numbers to round off. But the rounding off aspect of it is actually the same no matter what. So as long as you understand what rounding off is and how to do it, it doesn't matter what number they throw at you, as long as you know your place values, you'll be able to do it. So our goals today is understand why we round off, when are the times that we need to round off, and then be able to round off to the nearest 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. Although honestly, after this lesson, if you've understood those, you'll probably be able to round off to the nearest 100,000, to the nearest million. It just follows the same pattern at every single step. So why and when and why do we round off? Well, sometimes when we're estimating, we are using rounding off. So let's say I was going through went to the shop to buy some things to have a midnight snack or a party, and I only had a certain amount of money. Let's say I was lucky and I had 50 Rand, and I went first of all to the popcorn aisle, and I saw that the popcorn was like 11 Rand 99, and then I was going further down, I saw the chips, and they were let's say 18 Rand, sorry, 19 Rand, and so what I would do then is just to round off to make it easier if I'm keeping track in my head. So I'm going to be like, okay, the popcorn was 12 Rand, so let me just call that 10. So I know I've spent around about 10 for popcorn. I get to the chips, which were 19, and I'm going to just say, oh, that's close to 20. So I've got 10 from popcorn and 20 from chips. So I've spent about 30 of my 50 Rand, so I've got about 20 Rand left, around about. So when I go to the sweets aisle and I want to buy sweets, I know that I can only spend around about 20 Rand, maybe a little bit less because I rounded up a little bit more. So you see where I would use it if I was doing that sort of thing. Also, yeah, so that's kind of like also doing calculations in your head, but sometimes in maths, when you're faced with a calculation, you want to just get a good idea of where it is. Oh, pardon me. Then it's useful to just round off. So instead of thinking of 19 times 9, I think of 20 times 10, which is very easy, and then I can get close to the answer. Okay, and then sometimes when the exact number is unimportant, like let's say you're very wealthy and you've just bought a car, a nice new top of the line BMW, and it's like 963,586 Rand and 45 cents. It wouldn't make sense to tell somebody that. If you were telling your friend how much your dad's car cost, maybe you would say, oh, it was almost $1 million. So you see, we've taken that number that's close to $1 million because the exact number is not important. And so we just round off to a near number that's easy to understand because the exact number wasn't important. Plus, also, sometimes when we want to not bake things, make things sound better or worse, we want to make it sound like our dad's car is cooler, so you can say it's almost $1 million or it's around about $1 million. That makes it sound more expensive than it is. I don't know why people would be interested in an expensive car. If I had lots of money, I would rather spend it on something else. But you never know. Some people like cars. Okay. Yeah, so sometimes if you want to make things sound better or worse, you'll choose to round off to a lower number to make it sound worse, or to a higher number to make it sound better. That does happen, but you won't need to necessarily do that at this stage. Okay, so when we're rounding off, everything after the number we're rounding to becomes a 0. So let me show you what I mean by that. So if we're rounding off to the nearest 10, then the units will be 0. So you can see that I had 247, which I'm rounding off to 250. So I'm rounding to the tens column, to the nearest 10. And in my answer, everything that comes after the tens, in this case, just the units, will be a 0. When we round off to the nearest 100, the tens and the units will be 0. So when we're looking at hundreds, when we come to the answer, everything after the hundreds column is going to be a 0. So in this case, it's 0 and 0. So whatever our answer is, we know that the last two are going to be 0. When we round off to the nearest 1,000, the hundreds, tens, and units will be 0. So there's our thousands column. And in our answer, everything that's after the thousands column, the hundreds, tens, and units will all be zeros. Okay, I'll come to what this weird little wavy equals sign is in a moment. there it is. It means roughly equal to. So it's when we're rounding off, because if we said it was equal, it would mean that they were the same. So roughly equals means it's close to, but not quite the same. All right, let's go to our whiteboard and do some workings. So when we are rounding off to the nearest 10, which is where we're going to start what we look at, we've got to decide which is nearer, the 10 that comes before where we are or the 10 that comes after. So in this case, if I was looking at a number like 4, you can see that 4 is definitely closer to the beginning, or 0, and 6 is definitely closer to the next one. So 6 will round up to 10, and 4 will round down to 0. But what about this number in the middle, 5? Well, I'm sure I've told this story before about somebody who was swimming across the English Channel. So there's a nice big channel between England and France. It's a big swim, and people take it off. Do it, and sometimes it takes hours and hours, like 11 hours of swimming, and they have a boat with them and all sorts of things. But my story is about a man who was swimming, and it was beautiful conditions. And he was swimming and he was swimming and swimming, and he got to the middle, exactly in the middle. So it was the same distance back to France and the same distance forward to England, and he was tired. So he turned around and swam back. Now, surely some of you are thinking, but why did he swim back? If he just carried on, it would have been the same distance, and then he could say he'd managed to swim across. And that's exactly right. That's my silly little story, so that we include the 5 goes forward. So if it ends with a 5, it rounds up. If it ends with 4 or anything lower, it rounds down. Now, I've given you numbers here that are 0 and all the way through. But when I'm saying rounding to the nearest 10, this could as easily be 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, and 50. Right. And just in the same way, 45 and all of those would round to 50, and 44 and all of those would round down to 40. Let's have a look at some examples. So we're going to start off by looking at rounding off to the nearest 10. I've got 8 examples of rounding off to the nearest 10. Okay, so first up, we must use the roughly equal sign to. Roughly equal. I'm actually going to go ahead and put all of my roughly equal signs in. That last one looks a bit sad, but I'm not going to change it. All right. So when we're looking at rounding off, what we've got to do is see, well, we're rounding off to the nearest 10. So this is my tens column. But what I've actually got to do is have a look at the column to the right of that, this column. And I've got to look at that 4 and see, does 4 round up or down? Is it closer to the next 10 or the previous one? And as you saw over here, if it ends in a 4, it's going to round down. So we're going to round down. I now know that everything that comes after the tens column is going to be a 0. So that's my units column over there. My tens column remains unchanged. It stays as a 5. All right, so because this rounded down, because the 4 rounded down, the 5 stays unchanged. Let's have a look at the next one, which does change. So again, we're rounding to the nearest 10. So we look to the column to the right, the units, and we see that 8 is closer to rounding up. And so what we do is almost a little bit like carrying and adding. We carry a little 1 above the 8, which 1 plus 8 becomes 9. So our tens is 9, and our units, 0. So 88 is roughly equal to 90. It rounds off to 90. Our next example, we're also looking at rounding to the nearest 10, sorry. Then we look at the units. The units is a 5. So 5 was in the middle, so it rounds up to the next one. So it's like carrying to the tens. That becomes a 7. and the units is a 0. Okay, next one. We're looking at the tens column. The units stays the same, so our tens stays the same, and our units is 0. So in fact, this one, rounded off, is staying exactly the way it was. So technically, we could put an equals there as well, although for all of the rounding ones, I think you can put a roughly equals to. Now we have an interesting one. There is no tens column here, and yet we're rounding to the nearest 10. So the tens column would be over there. In fact, we have naught tens. We have a ghost 0. So we have a look at our units column. 4 goes down. It's closer to 0. So in fact, our tens column stays the same, and our units column becomes a 0. And 0, 0 is just the same as having 0. If we'd had, and I'm going to just jot this down next to this, if we'd had 6 and we wanted to round that off to the nearest 10, well, our tens column is there. We look over at our units column. 6 is going to round up, so I carry the 1. 0 plus 1 is 6. 0 plus 1 is 1. And our units column is 0. So 6 is closer to 10. So 6 rounds off to 10, but 4 rounds off to 0. Looking at the next one, I now have hundreds, although I am still rounding off to the nearest 10. So I can ignore my hundreds for now. I'm rounding off the nearest 10, so I dot under the 10 column. Have a look at the units. The units are going to go down because 3 is less, 3 is on the lower half. So it's going to go down. So my tens will stay the same, my hundreds will stay the same, and my units will become a 0. Now there are times when your hundreds will change, but let me first do number 8. I'm going to do 8 first and then 7. So for the next one, I'm also looking to round off to the nearest 10. There's my tens column. The fact that I have thousands and hundreds columns doesn't matter. So I look across at my units. My units are closer to going up. So I'm going to carry 1, I'm going to add 1. So 4 plus 1 is 5. So that's my tens column. My hundreds column stays the same. My thousands column stays the same. And my units column goes to 0. So let's have a look at number 7. For number 7, we're looking at the tens column. So we look to the right at the units. That'll go up. So I'm going to go 9 plus 1, and this is where it becomes a little bit tricky. Not tricky, but it's like adding. So 9 plus 1 is 10. So I make that and I carry it across there. So I'll have 5 hundreds, although my hundreds weren't involved in the rounding, and 0 in the tens column because it's already carried across, and my units column will be a 0. Okay, so as I mentioned in the slides at the beginning, what you'll notice is when it rounds off to the nearest 10, the last digit, or everything after the 10's column, will be a 0. And you can see those purple zeros all the way down. Okay, let's have a look at rounding off to the nearest, the nearest 100. So this time, instead of having those numbers, I've got different tens. But again, it works exactly the same. It's the same numbers, just with a 0 afterwards. So 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50, and then round up, and up to 40 round back down. So let's have a look. This follows the same pattern as what we've been doing with the other ones. So for the first one, I want to look at the hundreds column, which is over here. That's my ghost 0. I have no hundreds. I look to the right. Let me just change colors. I look over here to my tens column. I ignore my units column altogether. 6 is going to round up, so that'll carry. So it's roughly equal to 1 in the hundreds column and 0s in the tens and the units. Because remember, when we're rounding to the nearest 100, everything afterwards will have 0s in the tens and units. Okay, quickly having a look at the next one. We've got quite a few examples to get through, so I'm going to move quite quickly. Rounding to nearest 100, have a look at the tens column. 3 goes down, so it stays, so the hundreds stay the same. So hundreds will remain as 1. And the units and tens will be zeros. Looking at my next one, 4. So we're looking at 4 in the hundreds. Check over the tens. That's going to go down because 4 is below the middle. Right, so the 4 in the front stays the same. And after that, we get all zeros. My next one, I've inserted, or I've put in thousands as well, although we're not going to use them. We have a look at our tens column, our hundreds column. Check over at our tens to see what happens to our hundreds. It's 9. It's going to go up, so that'll become 9 in the hundreds. 1 in the thousand stays the same, and the 2 zeros at the end. I actually know that I'm going to have zeros at the end of each of these, so I could really put them in if I wanted all the way down. Having a look at my next one, number 5. Checking out the hundreds column. Right, I have nothing there. Looking at my tens column. My tens, that's going to go down, so I'm going to end up with no hundreds, no tens, and no units. I could also just write this as a 0, because having none of any of them, I can just write a 0. Looking at the last one from this section, I look to my hundreds over here. I have a look across at the tens over here. A 9 is closer to going forward, so I'm going to add another one to my hundreds. So if I have a look at what's left in my there, I've got nothing because I've already carried it across, and I now have 3. So I round it off, and 2,990 is roughly equal to 3,000. So that's rounded off to the nearest 100. Okay. 2 more sets to go, rounding off to the nearest 1,000. So again, having a look across the list, the only difference is the extra zeros. Again, if it starts with a 5, we're going to round it up. If it starts with 4 or lower, we're going to round it down. So 6 examples from rounding off to the nearest 1,000. So we find our thousands column. We have a look across at the hundreds column, the one to the right. 3 is going to go down because it stays the same, so my 2 remains unchanged, and everything else is 0. Looking to the next one, thousands column, look across at my hundreds column. That's going to go up, so 6 is closer, so it's going to carry. So I'm going to get 4 in the thousands. Everything else after that is 0. Looking to the next one, thousands column. Look across at my hundreds. It's going to go down because it's 4 or low, so the thousands column stays the same, and everything else is 0. Looking at the next one, and I deliberately chose these two here because they're very close. There's actually only one apart from them, and I wanted to illustrate how when you round, sometimes it can make quite a big difference to what your answer is. So we're looking at our thousands. We look at our hundreds. Oh, it's a 5. It's going to round up. So my thousands become 2. And all after that is 0. So this is where there are times when you round off that it can be can take you quite far away from where the answer is. So you can see there was only one difference between 499 and 1,500, but the difference when you round it off is quite big. But that is not incorrect. It's still the way that we round off. Just bear in mind that it can create a bit of a difference when it comes to the answer. Right, so we're looking for our thousands, our ghost 0. We have a look at 3. 3 is going to go down, so we're going to have nothing in our thousands column. It stays the same. And likewise, we're going to have nothing in any of those, which is the same as saying 0. Looking at our thousands column, have a look at our hundreds column to see what happens. It's 8, it's going to round up, so we're going to get 10 over there. And all of our zeros afterwards. There we go. 9,876 rounds off to 10,000. Our last batch, rounding off to the nearest 10,000, it follows the same pattern. So let's quickly jump through these examples. So we're rounding off the nearest 10,000. This is my 10,000s column. This is my 10,000s. There's a ghost one over here. This is my 10,000s, and this is my 10,000s. We always look to the column on the right to see what happens. 8's going to round up, so I'm going to get a 6 in the front. And after the 10,000s column, everything will be 0. Looking over here at the 4, 4 is going to round down, so my 6 remains unchanged. Everything after that is a 0. For my next one, look across at the thousands column. 4 goes down. I get 0 over there, and all noughts after it, which is the same as saying just 0. So you don't have to write all the noughts. It actually is meaningless. You can just write the 1 0 at the end. Okay, look to my 7, or look to my thousands column. 7 is going to round up, so I'm going to get a 9 in my 10,000s column. My 100,000 stays the same, and everything after that is a 0. And my final one for today, 9 is going to carry over there. That makes 10, so it'll carry over to there, which means that my final answer, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 100,000. So 99,999 rounds off to 100,000. That's all we have for rounding off today, grade 5. Afterwards, just click on the link above to do the worksheet, just to make sure you've got it. I think it should be quite straightforward now. So the only thing is you need to know your column values. So you need to know where the thousands are, 10,000s, hundreds and tens and units. But once you've done this, if you've understood it, it translates to decimals, it translates to millions, 100 millions. It works the same no matter where you are. So as long as you know you find the right column, you look at the column next to it, you see if it rounds up or down, and then you just make the rest after that 0. You should be good to go for rounding for the rest of primary school. At least I hope you are. Grade 5s, have a fantastic day. I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.